Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 23 and if you're new here, don't worry if you haven't seen any of the other videos in this series. We'll link a playlist at the top of the screen so that you can go back and check out anything you might have missed. We're making a quilt on a garden theme and we're making roughly one block a week, and then later in the year we'll start piecing all of these blocks together and learning more about the quilting process. This week I'm using a pieced block, so I've cut two pieces of backing fabric. One is my pale blue and the other one is my grass fabric, and both of these pieces are 20 centimetres by 11 centimetres, and I've joined them together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance on the back, and I've pressed the seam down to the green fabric because that is the stronger colour. If you're not sure about the joining process, we have covered this in a number of previous videos, and I will link a video tutorial to take you through this process at the top of the screen so that you can go back and do that if you want to. I have got a template for this week. This is available on our website. I'll put the address at the bottom of the screen and I'll also put a direct link in the description below. This costs £1 to download. It's just a nominal charge just to help cover the cost of these videos and help keep my channel running. And if you can't tell from the black and white outline drawing, this week we are going back to our bird panels and we're making a blackbird. So I've got a selection of black quilting fabrics here. I've got some patterns and I've got some plain black as well. And we're going to do some applique with these. I've also got a couple of tiny scraps of yellow. These are the same weight as my backing fabric, so you don't want anything too heavy. I've also got some bonder web. I've got my embroidery and paper scissors, and I've got a pencil, and then I've got my embroidery threads. So these are all Anchor brand. I've got my white, which is 001, blue, which is 130, my yellow, which is 298, red, which is 046, pink, which is 025. I've got my lightest green, I may not use this, that's 255, and I've got my black thread as well. So I'm going to start off by bringing in my light box, and I just want to trace some of the lines so that I've got some idea of placement. Now I've brought in a heat erase pen here, but in hindsight I really should have used my water erase because of course when I'm using bonder web, the moment I start pressing my pieces and fusing them to the background, my lines are all going to disappear. So I would recommend using either a pencil or a water erase pen to do this. I don't have to do the entire outline, just the odd mark here and there, just at the extremities, just to help me place my pieces is all that I need really. So just making sure I've got the beak, the tip of the tail, and the underbelly, and then some of the placements for the wings as well are going to help me. I'm also going to mark in the position of the legs and the position of the daisies that we're going to add to the grass area. And once that's done, I'm just going to add in a little line just to guide me just across the body of the bird there, and that will just allow me to use different fabrics. Now I want my bird facing to the right, and that means I need to flip my pattern over so that the bird faces left while I'm tracing my bonder web shapes. And that's because we're going to apply these shapes to the back of our fabric and then flip them over to attach them to our background fabric, and that means they're all going to face in the opposite direction. So I'm just tracing around each shape, making sure they're nice and separate, and I'm numbering them on my bonder web and on my pattern so that I can remember which piece is which. I'm just trying to be careful to follow the outlines as closely as I possibly can, and then I'm going to cut them roughly out of the bonder web. I don't want them precisely cut at this point. We'll do that once we've fused to the fabric. So I've brought in my ironing pad, and with bonder web we need to make sure our bonder web is glue side down onto the back of the fabric. So this first piece doesn't have a back or a front, I'm just fusing that down. About 10 seconds is all you need. And then I've got my sun shape, which is going on my spot fabric. So again, I'm just smoothing my iron over to make sure I'm not pressing any creases or lumps into my shape. So I'm going to do the top of the bird's back and head on my plain black fabric. So you can see I'm just working with tiny scraps here. These are little offcuts, and I've got a small quilting iron. So with this larger shape, I've started at the head end, and once that is fused, I just slide my iron without lifting it from the surface and push any air out from under my shape as I press it to the fabric. Once I've pressed them all down, I can cut those out precisely now, and doing it this way round means that I am guaranteed to have glue right to the very edges of my pieces. So I've cut all of those out, and now we're going to fuse them on. So I'm starting with the bird's head and back and using those little marker points to just line up the shape, make sure it's correctly positioned. And at this point I realised that I was going to erase all my marks, so you can see I'm just going to catch a tiny part of that bird shape down with my iron without touching any of the other lines, and I'll press them all down more firmly in a moment. So now the beak's going on, and my little markers are helping me just work out which angle that beak should be at. And then I've got the bird's belly. So we need to think about what shapes are behind and what shapes are in front, and just make sure we're placing them in the right order. So now I've got the bird's belly on, just popping the sun in. That's a nice easy one to position. So that one can just be pressed into place. And because I've got my wingtip extending out beyond the body of the bird, that helps me position that wingtip, and that's going to guide me with the other pieces of the wing. So just putting the upper wing on now, and then the top rounded part of the wing where it joins onto the bird's body. And so we've got a bit of a patchwork blackbird. I didn't want it to be all jet black because black only features a tiny bit on our quilt, so I wanted to mix it up and get some patterns in there. I'm just going to put some markers on my sun. I'm going to put some sun rays in, just like we have done with our other bird blocks. So I've just done my north, south, east, west, and then put in a marker in between each of those, and then I'm going in with another marker in between the eighths. So I've got 16 marks in total now, and I thought we could do some extended detached chain stitches here. So we've done this stitch lots of times before. I'm going to bring my needle through right at the top of the stitch, so I'm extending that stitch out beyond the circle of the sun. I'm going to take my needle back down at exactly the same point where it came out of the fabric, and then I'm going to bring my needle through, catching that loop in and extending my straight stitch down into the sun shape. Let me show you that again. So I'm bringing my needle out, taking it back down at the same point, rocking my needle forward and bringing my needle back out inside that loop that I've made, and then I can put my extended straight stitch in to anchor that loop down. And these stitches partly decorate my block, but they also help to secure those bonder webbed pieces down. So these stitches are going to help our quilt last and survive repeated washing and things like that. So should the bonder web fail at some point in the future, our pieces won't all fall off because they're all held in place anyway. So I'm just going to work my way around my sun, putting a stitch every time I've put a mark, and I'm not worried about them all being exactly the same length. I just want something quite decorative. So now I've got a white heat erase pen and I'm putting in some markers to guide some stitching. We're going to put some overstitching on our bird so that we sort of decorate the surface, and again we want to hold our pieces down. So white heat erase pens tend to go on clear and develop over time, so don't worry that nothing's happening. You should be able to see these lines get brighter and stronger as the ink dries. So I'll just put some wavy lines on the top of the wing, just following the curve of the shape, and I've put some lines down the bottom of the wing, and then I've put some parallel lines just following the belly of the bird. I've got a single strand of white thread here, and I thought we could put in some blanket stitch around these curves. So the blanket stitch is going to follow the curves, the horizontal part of the stitch is going to be on the line, and then we're going to do some long verticals coming down that fill the gap between each of the lines. So I'm starting at the edge of that top wing piece, and I'm keeping these stitches quite close together, so they're quite an elongated stitch, so they are quite narrow with long verticals, and I think this looks quite feathery. I think the effect works really well to create a sort of sense of feathers here, and I'm just going to make my stitches follow the curve on the left hand side of that shape, and I'm going to stitch all the way along it using that next line that I've sketched in as a guide for where my vertical should sit. So you should just see the shape of the wing becoming more visible, more obvious as I stitch along it. That horizontal part of the stitch forms a line that outlines the applique shape at the rounded part of the wing. So once I've got to the end there, I'm just going to put a little anchor stitch in, and then I'm going to work back in the opposite direction along the next line along the wing. So you can see I've put in several lines of blanket stitch there to create a sort of feathered effect at the top of the wing. So now I'm going to work down the length of the wing, and I've got my vertical lines there, and I'm going to put in some fly stitch along these verticals. I really like fly stitch, it's another quite feathery looking stitch. So to make this stitch, we're going to come up to the left of the line, bringing our needle through to the front of the fabric. There are quite a number of layers here, and I've got Bondo web as well, so it's a little bit tough. And then I'm going to go down on the right hand side and rock my needle forward, coming up inside that loop that I've created, and then I can make a straight stitch down the line and then rock out to the left again, go across to the right, and then I'm going to bring my needle up on that line at the centre, making sure that the loop that I've created is around the needle. And when I pull my working thread tight, that loop is caught on the working thread and forms a sort of V shape, and then I can put my vertical straight stitch. I have loads of stitch tutorials on my channel, so if you're not sure about any of the stitches that I'm using, do check out my stitch tutorials playlist, because there's loads and loads of stitches there. So I'm going to put fly stitch down all of these 4 lines, and I think I also added a bit of running stitch in between those lines of feather stitch as well, which you can do or not, it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to put all those stitches in, and then we'll come back and look at the next stage. So I've brought in my darkest green here. I thought the grey was too pale and the white was too bold. I wanted something dark but not black, because I wanted it to show up. So I've got a single strand again, and this time I'm just going to add some running stitch following those lines around the bird's belly. So really simple here, just quite small stitches, just forming a little bit of texture on the belly of the bird and adding in a little bit of stitch detail So just going to go along that line just inside the shape of the fabric, and then I'll work my way back and stitch on each of those lines that I've sketched in. So I'll do that in front of the wing, and then I also added some stitching. So now we're going to mark the eye, and you can see that I've started putting these in. I've just drawn a little circle with my heat erase pen, and I'm back stitching around it. I think I got about maybe 6 stitches around the eye shape. Back stitch really simple, so you just bring your needle through to the surface of the fabric and work a stitch length back the way that you came. So I'm working back clockwise, and then you come forward anti-clockwise 2 stitch lengths, bring your needle up, and that will leave a space, and then you work back to the previous stitch. And once I've gone all the way around, I'm going to just whip that, and I'm working from the inside of the eye to the outside. It's tricky to whip back stitch when you're working in a circle. So rather than thinking of working left to right or right to left, I like to think about working from the inside of the circle to the outside, and that makes sure that all your stitches are going to be going in the same direction. So I'm just working my way back around those back stitches and sliding my needle underneath the stitch. I'm not going through the fabric here, just working through the stitch, and when I'm back to the beginning, I take my needle back down through the fabric, and I can secure that on the back if I want to. But I also need to put some stitching in the beak, so rather than finishing off here, I'm just going to come up just inside that beak shape, and I'm going to put some little running stitches just around the outside of that shape, just to secure it and make sure that it's not going to fall off in the future. So nothing fancy here, just some simple stitching to hold that little applique shape in place. Now I'm going to add in a little bit of stitching along the back of the bird. So I'm going to use a sort of angled blanket stitch here, so my verticals of the stitch are coming down towards the tail end of the bird, and you can see I'm angling my needle back up towards the head of the bird there to catch the loop and form the back stitch. So I'm going to have a kind of outline along the top of the back of the bird and some vertical stitches coming down into the bird's body, just again to add a little bit of texture and to secure that shape to the backing fabric with something more than just the bonder web. So I'm working all the way along the back down to the tail end. So that's all the stitching on the bird's body. We now need to put some legs in. So I'm just going to put in some markers for the tops of the legs. We want a bit of featheriness at the top of the leg, just so that it's not 2 sticks coming out of the bird. And I'm just going to satin stitch these, so it's just little rectangles, and I'm just bringing my needle up at the bird's body and taking it back down at the bottom of that little feathery section at the top of the leg, and then I'm bringing my needle up right next to where I made the first stitch, and I want to keep my stitches as close together as I possibly can. I don't want any spaces between them, and I'm just every now and again hooking my needle underneath the stitches and lifting them a little bit just to ease the tension so that I don't create puckering on my fabric. So that's my satin stitch in place, and I'm now going to stitch the legs in with some chain stitch. So this is just like we did on the sun, but this time rather than doing a straight stitch, I take my needle back down where my thread came up and form a new chain stitch. So you can see here my thread's coming out through the fabric. I'm taking it round to create a loop, take my needle back down where it came out and bring it back up inside that loop that I've created. I'm using my darkest brown here, and that is Anchor 380. For the feet, I'm just going to put in some straight stitches. You can see me rocking my needle forward to the very tip of the toe and bringing my needle back to the bottom of the leg. And I think I put 2 stitches for each of the toes because I just wanted it to look a little bit stronger, and then I put in a tiny little straight stitch just angled away from that toe, just so that I had a little bit of a claw. You can see me coming up there away from the toe, and I'm going back to the top of the toe to put in that little claw. And I just repeated that on all 4 of the toes so that I had a sort of foot that looked semi-realistic. I know these are all sort of stylised and cartoonish, but they are supposed to be semi-realistic so that they are convincingly the bird that we're trying to create. Last finishing touch is to put in some daisies, and again this is just like we've done before. I'm making a little lazy daisy. We put our chain stitches in, so again exactly the same process as what we did for the sun, but this time we're going to keep our anchor stitch really short, so we're just hopping over the loop to anchor it down, and then we're going to work several chain stitches in a circle. So those little circles that we've marked in on the grass are going to guide us, and I'm trying to put 5 stitches in, so just working the angles there. If you want to, you can mark in your petal positions. That will help you keep them regular as you work around the circle. I do tend to hop about a little bit when I'm doing lazy daisies. I don't always just rotate around. So just putting 5 little stitches in, and I'm going to use the colours that I've been using right across the quilt. So some will be pink, some red, blue, white and yellow, and I'm going to put in the centres again with those colours, just sort of mixing them up between the flowers, so trying to keep it fairly random. I'm just putting in my last little chain stitch here, and then we hop over the chain to put our little anchor stitch in place. So I've put some of those in, and now I'm just going to put in my little French knot. So bring my thread through, wrap it around the needle and keep it under tension. I'm just doing 3 wraps here. These are all done with 2 strands of thread, and then I take my needle back through close to where it came out, keep it under tension and pull through, and that creates my little French knot. So I've got 2 strands of pink here, so again wrap the needle, keep it under tension, take the needle back through, and you can see me holding on until the last moment. So I need to just give it a press from the back, so I've got it face down on my ironing mat so that I don't crush all my stitches and knots, and I'm just pressing that to get rid of any markings on the fabric and even out the tension of the stitches. And here's our finished panel. I really love this one. I've got a real soft spot for blackbirds, and this one makes me really happy. We've got our stitch detail on the wing. It's quite hard to see some of the stitching on the back because I did black thread, but you can see there, if I just angle it, it just catches the light. So I hope you've enjoyed making our little blackbird panel. It's a nice one to add to our collection of birds that are going to appear around our quilt. If you have enjoyed that, please do give us a like. We really appreciate it. It helps other people find our videos. If you want to share your blocks, please add hashtag FSH23quilt, and that means all the blackbird blocks will be gathered together under that hashtag. If you want a similar project to this, I will link some videos over here. And if you want to subscribe, you can click on our logo down here. It means so much to us if you want to be part of our little community. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great time making your applique blackbird, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!